So we're going to go over creating artboards and clipping masks. The general rule of thumb is that Illustrator is a great software when you're creating graphics such as logos or posters or something of that nature. InDesign is a great piece of software when you're creating multiple page documents full of links. So these links could be images, they could be graphics, they could be logos. And it's really a tool to kind of help you organize your project, whereas Illustrator is going to be a tool to help you draw things. So because I'm doing figure ground relationship compositions, even though I'm using multiple artboards or pages, I'm going to use Illustrator because Illustrator has the better tools to do that. So I'm going to click Create New. So I think the options can sometimes feel overwhelming if this is your first time using Illustrator, but I find this screen quite helpful. You can even start by naming your composition. So because I'm drawing figure ground relationships, I'm going to call this figure ground, and then I'm going to go ahead and give it the date. So I typically like to give the date in year to month to day sequence, so that when it's organized in my file explorer, that it's organized in a proper way. Okay, by default, Illustrator generally wants to measure in picas. Now, picas is a unit of measurement used in graphic design. As an architect, I don't think in picas, so I often find myself changing it to inches here. But Illustrator is smart enough that if you're lazy and you don't want to change it from picas, that you could go ahead and enter in the proper amount of inches that you want. Okay, so I could enter in 2 inches and don't hit enter, and it's going to convert it over to picas, or excuse me, it's going to convert it over to inches. So you can see here that I just prefer having it in inches, and I already know that I'm going to want 40 artboards. So in Illustrator, they call their pages artboards. I think it's probably a remnant from the day when they did graphic design by hand, but essentially they're pages. And I'm going to go ahead and click Create. So we can notice that it's given us 40 sets of artboards. And that's great. That's what I asked for. But I typically like to be a little bit more organized. So I know that in my figure ground relationships, I'm going to do 10 letter forms with 3 abstract forms. So I'm going to go down here and click on this Artboard tool, or you could click Shift O, and that's going to bring up some new options up here. So this ribbon up here is dynamic, and it at times change with the kind of tool you're using. So we already set it up to be 2 inches by 2 inches. If by chance you ended up not doing the correct size, you could change the artboards there. So what I'm after is actually rearranging all of the boards to stay pretty organized. So I know that because I have 10 letter forms, I'm going to want 10 columns. And I'm going to set it at 2.25 spacing in between. The spacing is this kind of gray behind poche, and that'll work well for this kind of composition. So now that we have our 10 columns, these are all going to be my letter forms, and these are all going to be my abstract forms that are corresponding with the letter form up here. One thing to note is that each page is listed up here. So we've got kind of page 1 or artboard 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and so on and so forth. That'll come in handy when we go ahead and insert this into InDesign. So I can just hit Escape to get out of the Artboard tool, and I can begin my compositions. So in order to create a letter form, I'm just going to go ahead and kind of create a text box. So unlike, say, a software like Microsoft Word where you just type onto the page, Illustrator and InDesign needs some kind of box. It needs to be told what shape it's going to be. It needs to be told what size that box is going to be, okay? And once you've created a text box, then you can start typing into it just like you would in a software like Microsoft Word. By default, Illustrator will sometimes throw in some Latin text. This is just to show you kind of the overall aesthetic that it will produce once you fill out the text. In this case, I only really want one. So I'm going to go choose my font. And in this case, I'm just going to choose something default like Times New Roman, because everybody has that. And I'm going to choose a letter like A. So it's quite small. You can bump that up into, say, like 200 might be a proper proportion. It's actually too big, but it's fine for what we're doing at the moment. So what you'll notice is that now that you've created your letter form, if you try to scale this by grabbing the corner box, it's not really going to scale dynamically. That's because this box is trying to accommodate adding more than just a single letter. Well, we're more interested, instead of doing kind of a paragraph full of text, making this A into a graphic. So we can go up here into type and then click convert to a point type. That'll make it so now that when I grab this letter, it'll scale dynamically with the box. Please note that if you try to scale it, you're going to deform the letter form unless you hold shift. Okay, so if you hold shift and hold that corner and drag it, then it's going to scale to proportion. So you're not going to lose that proportion, which is what you want. You don't want to manipulate. So notice how I'm zooming in and zooming out. So you could do that up here somehow. Yeah, Control plus plus, some people do that. The easiest way to do it is actually to hold Alt and then use your scroll wheel. And then to pan, I'm just hitting spacebar, holding it, and then left clicking like that. So now I've got this letter, and at the moment I'm just going to go ahead and eyeball it and put it in the middle of the middle of the artboard, okay? And that'll be my first kind of letter form composition. So I like to stay relatively organized. I'm going to go to this Layers tab over here, open it up, and I'm going to call these things letter form. Okay. So any letter forms, I'm going to put them on that blue tab, and then I can click. Let's see, move it over here. I think Control C, which is the copy. If you don't like using short keys, you can see all of the copy paste options up here in edit. And then I'm going to paste in place, okay? So you can paste on all our boards using Control Shift Alt V, which is what I'm going to do right now. Control Shift Alt V. Boom. So I actually didn't even shift it over. Control Alt V. And let's try one more time. Let me copy it from this position and then Control Alt V. So now I've populated every artboard with a letter form. But I only really want letter forms on the top one, so I'm going to go ahead and delete those bottom ones. And I'm going to copy just one more. But I'm going to wait to paste it actually. So I'm going to lock this layer, and you can do that here by toggling the lock. You can hide it with this eyeball there. You can see what's on the layer by expanding it there. Okay, so this is your kind of tool for organization. And then I'm going to click down here in this tab that says create a new layer. And then I am going to create a red layer. And this one I'm going to call abstract. And you'll notice that everything on this layer is blue, because that's what the color of the layer is. And everything, I'm going to go ahead and paste that one that I copied here. Everything on the abstract form is in red. So we have this, and if I scale it up, the annoying thing when I'm trying to get a figure-ground relationship is that the letter bleeds over the edge of the page. So in order to make it more, abstract, I'm going to use a clipping mask, and I'm going to create a box over the entire size of this artboard. And then I'm going to grab both the letter and the rectangle we just created. The color of the rectangle doesn't matter, it's just the geometry that we're more concerned with. So once I've got them both selected, I right click and then I go down to make clipping mask. Now those two shapes are kind of nested together. You can see that if I expand the layers down here, and then you can see how this is now called a clip group. If I expand this here, it's called a clip group, and you can see everything inside of that clip group. So now those things are kind of operating as one thing. And then I went ahead, and if you want to manipulate this letter inside the clipping mask, I just double click it, and now I've got access to it. And I'm going to hold shift and I'm going to scale this dynamically. And I'm going to try and find the best figure-ground relationship possible. Then I can go ahead and copy that one down here and paste it into that one. And now I'm going to try and find another thing. So maybe in this case, I'm okay with the scale, but I'm more interested in rotating it. So in order to rotate it, instead of hovering over the vertices, I'm going to hover just, northeast of it. And you'll notice that the cursor kind of changes dynamically with it. So this cursor is going to mean scale, this one's going to mean rotate. So I'm just going to grab it now and left click hold to rotate it. And I'm thinking something like that is a little bit interesting. And then I'm nudging it with just the arrow keys on my keyboard, like that. And then I say, actually, let me just try and scale it a little bit more down and kind of manipulate this composition, like so. And then I'm going to do one that's completely different than those other ones. And maybe I'm going to focus on the serif part. And I'm going to do that. Maybe this one will be really blown up. And notice that as I'm scaling this thing dynamically, that the font size is also changing. And that's why we really scaled it down in the beginning to a 2" by 2" composition, because this can only go up to 12, like 81 or something like that. So now I've got 3 compositions, which I think look pretty good. So the next thing to do is to come up with another letter. So I am going to unlock that. It doesn't really have to stay locked. And I'm going to choose another layer, or another letter. This one I'm going to choose, let's say X. Maybe not X, maybe let's do something a little bit curvier. Let's go with a lowercase y. Yeah, that's kind of an interesting shape down there. I'm also interested in scaling this perhaps a little bit smaller to begin with, for it to be a little bit more delicate in the middle of the composition. Maybe that's a little bit too small. Again, every time I'm scaling this, I'm holding shift so that I don't deform it. And I could easily copy this, and by default, every time I copy paste, if I paste when it's on the blue section, then it's going to paste on the blue layer. If I want to change that and I want to paste it on the abstract layer, I just need to have that one highlighted, and then it'll be red. So you could do the whole process over again like that, and then select both, right click, make clipping mask, double click it in, and hold shift. So you just kind of play around with it until you feel like you get an interesting figure-ground relationship. That one could be interesting. and then copy, paste, and replicate. So I'm going to click exit to get out of that. Copy, paste, move it down, and just keep going. And you plug along until you filled up all of these iterations.